Support for Stuff Mom Never Told You comes from our friends at Rocket Mortgage by Quicken Loans. Chances are you're confident when it comes to your work, your hobbies, and your life. Rocket Mortgage gives you that same level of confidence when it comes to buying a home or refinancing your existing home loan. With Rocket Mortgage, you can apply simply and understand fully so you can mortgage confidently. To get started, go to rocketmortgage.com/momstuff. Equal housing lender, licensed in all 50 states, NMLS consumeraccess.org, number 3030. Hey, this is Bridget.
And this is Annie.
And you're listening to Stuff Mom Never Told You. Now today, it's 420. Yay! It's actually not 420, but by the time you listen to this, it will be.
Well, that's true, and we can't say for sure when you're listening to this.
Oh.
But it came out, it debuted on 420.
Thank you.
Of the year 2018.
So if you're listening to this in the year 3030.
On 420.
Oh.
Wow. What a coinky-dink.
Congratulations on being a time traveler.
Yeah. You're probably like, am I high? I don't know.
So we wanted to do an episode commemorating the day. Annie, did you happen to catch the viral gubernatorial candidate Cynthia Nixon's video about marijuana?
I did not, Bridget, actually.
So basically, if you don't know, Cynthia Nixon, a.k.a. Miranda from Sex and the City, redhead, fiery, mother to Brady, wife to Steve. I watch the show religiously in case you can't tell. She's running for governor of New York. She actually seems like she's doing a great job. A friend of mine, Nicole Arrow, is running her campaign. Shout out to Nicole.
Cool.
And she put out a video about marijuana. Here's what she had to say.
I believe it's time for New York to follow the lead of 8 other states and D.C. and legalize recreational marijuana. There are a lot of good reasons for legalizing marijuana. But for me, it comes down to this. We have to stop putting people of color in jail for something that white people do with impunity. 80% of the New Yorkers who are arrested for marijuana are Black or Latino, despite the fact that whites and people of color use marijuana at roughly the same rates.
So that's what she had to say. People are pretty excited about her campaign. They were already pretty excited, but now they're even more excited that she came out as pro-legalization of marijuana for New York. And it's actually kind of interesting, right? New York is a pretty liberal state. You would think that it would already be legalized, but it's not.
Yeah. Over on my other podcast, Food Stuff, we also have a 420 episode on edibles. And I was trying to research all the laws in the United States, versus recreational versus medicinal. And whoa, did I get confused. And it sounds like nobody's really sure what's going on.
Exactly. So let's back up a little bit. So it turns out that about 6 in 10 Americans, that's 61%, say that the use of marijuana should be legalized. Now, this is data from the Pew Research Center. And it is actually pretty confusing about where it's legal, in what way it's legal, how it's enforced across the country. It's a little bit confusing. So here are some baseline facts that even us as non-legal scholars can agree are the facts. Earlier this year, recreational marijuana became legal in California, which is the most populous state in the country. In 2012, Colorado and Washington State became the first states to legalize marijuana for recreational purposes. So that means you could just go to a store, buy a joint, and smoke it on the street just for funsies.
Wow.
Yeah, imagine.
I know.
Since then, 7 more states and Washington, D.C. have followed, although Vermont and D.C., while allowing marijuana possession and growing, continue to bar sales for recreational purposes. Now, as someone who lives in D.C., I can tell you, it kind of goes back to what you were saying earlier, Annie. D.C. kind of operates in this kind of, I guess you would call it a weird legal logistical gray area. Technically, it is legal to possess marijuana in Washington, D.C. It is not technically legal to smoke it in public, although if you are smoking it in public, the worst that can happen to you is a ticket. Police have to actually see you smoking. If they see smoke and they assume you're smoking, they can't do anything. But if they have to, like, actually see you smoking to, stop you. Mm-hmm. Also, it's still technically illegal to buy it. But what that means is D.C. now operates on this kind of wink, wink, nudge, nudge system where you can buy it, but it's like it's like a gift. Like, oh, you're actually buying the lighter, but we're doing a promotion right now.
Yeah.
And with the lighter comes a free joint. It's like, so it's a little bit like, I mean, it's basically legal. I should also point out that it is still legal on federal land. And so in D.C., a lot of land is federal. So sometimes if you're on one part of the sidewalk, you're not on federal land. If you're on another part of the sidewalk, you are on federal land. Whoa. So that can be a little bit tricky.
Yeah.
But for the most part, in D.C., it is legal, even though it's exactly what you were talking about earlier, where it's that kind of tricky, confusing. Like, people I know who smoke weed and live in D.C. still don't know the specifics of how the legislation works, because it is confusing.
Yeah, and I mean, not to mention it's still illegal on the federal level.
Exactly.
So there's the whole problem of how do these legal businesses in their state operate? I mean, it's tax season as well. They, from what I understand, all the profit has to be in cash or something. Like, it's just very convoluted, complicated. I've also read that in some states, it is illegal to smoke it in public. And that's why edibles are so popular, is because it's hard to say if someone's eating a brownie. I don't know. It's one of the reasons that that industry in particular is seeing exponential growth.
That is interesting. You know a little something about edibles, don't you, Annie?
What are you implying, Bridget?
All right, we'll move on. So, interestingly enough, there's been new legislation introduced in 2 states, Utah and Oklahoma, to legalize marijuana. Now, those are 2 of the most conservative states in the country, which really seems to indicate that as a country, we are moving more toward legislation and less toward cracking down on people for smoking weed.
Right. And going back to the federal level, the Trump administration has been iffy on the issue. In January, Attorney General Jeff Sessions rescinded an Obama-era memo that effectively protected states that had legalized marijuana from federal intervention. Since marijuana remains illegal at the federal level for any purpose, the Obama memo signaled to states that they could proceed with reforms without the constant threat of the feds raiding state legal businesses. Sessions' move, however, revived the possibility of federal intervention, telling prosecutors they could crack down on marijuana even if it's legal under state law. But over the past week, Trump promised not to go after marijuana suppliers and users who are obeying their state laws. So it's like...
I know. It's hard to say. And I'm someone who, I don't trust Trump, as y'all know. No. And so I'm like, oh, you said this? We'll see.
That's how you were feeling that day.
Exactly. I'm like, I'll give that a we'll see how it goes in my book. But something to know is that even John Boehner, remember him?
Yep.
Well, the former Speaker of the House, who once said that he was, quote, unalterably opposed to legalization, has recently, quote, evolved on the issue, and he announced that he'd be joining Acreage Holding, a group that cultivates and distributes cannabis across 11 states and hopes to roll back federal restrictions on the drug. So even old stick-in-the-mud Boehner is coming around on the issue.
Yeah, he evolved to seeing there's money to be made.
I mean, listen, the only color that matters is green.
Really? Well, that works on 2 levels. I just got it, Bridget.
Wow, it's a slow reaction time.
What? I don't appreciate the implications.
Listen, y'all, I got to level with you. If you listen to earlier iterations of the show, you know that sometimes we'd have episodes that are all around somebody's unpopular opinion. And I don't think I ever really waded into the unpopular opinion territory. I hope that we'll get some good Annie unpopular opinions going forward. But today is a Bridget unpopular opinion. And that opinion is, I hate 420. And I'll tell you why after this quick break.
Hey everybody, I am Robert Evans, the host of a new podcast called Behind the Bastards that's dropping on May 1st. We're going to tell you everything you don't know about the very worst people in all of history. For example, you think you know Hitler, but did you know that he was obsessed his entire life with a young adult fiction series that was basically the German equivalent of Harry Potter? And in fact, he based a lot of his military strategies on these weird children's books written by an elderly con man. And you could probably guess that a guy like Saddam Hussein isn't the best parent in history, but actually I've studied all of the dictator's parenting strategies, and he was not just bad, but the worst. You want to know who the best was? Check out our episode on the children of dictators. Behind the Bastards. It's everything you don't know about the worst people in history. So, every Tuesday you can check us out. We're dropping our first episode on May 1st. I'm Robert Evans. Please check out Behind the Bastards. Also, I use explicit language, so keep your kids away or put on headphones and ignore them. Again, every Tuesday, Behind the Bastards. Check us out!
And we're back, and I just revealed my unpopular opinion. A lot of y'all are probably surprised by this. I'm a pretty chill person, obviously. I have no problem with marijuana or drug use at all. I'm very pro, but I hate 420. And let me tell you, I don't just hate 420. I hate shows that glorify weed. I don't like anything on Vice that's like, hey, let's make a turkey dinner, but then, like, put weed in it. I hate that. I hate that so much. Like, when I see commercials for it makes me cringe. I hate sort of trend articles that are like, oh, look at these moms who are driving the carpool but also smoke weed. I hate that. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
It like boils my blood. Basically, I hate almost anything to do with weed and popular culture. There are exceptions. Most music.
Yeah.
Probably the second season of that show, Weeds, which I did enjoy.
Specifically.
Well, if you watched Weeds, you know it like went off the rails. And
it really did.
Did you watch it?
I did. I couldn't tell you which season is the second season, but I remember when her kid shot that person.
Yeah, Pilar. And they go to Mexico, and there's that weird underground tunnel with the, like, this is kind of going off the rails, but it is related, kind of. The series finale of the show.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I've never seen a worse series finale. It's so bad. Where it's like, well, spoiler alert if you haven't seen Weeds, but that was like 12 years ago. It fasts forward 20 years into the future. So they're like in hover cars, and it's the future. Uh-huh. And Nancy Botwin basically opens the Starbucks of weed,
Oh,
it's
sure.
like the weirdest. And the episode before that ends with her in one of the show's typical sort of, how's Nancy going to get out of this one? Like, she's being held up at gunpoint by gangsters. And then the next episode, they don't address how she dealt with that. It's just the future, and everything's fine, and she's rich, and there's flying cars. It's the worst.
Man, I watched every episode of that show, and I don't remember that, so I must have blocked it out.
Bridget. It's clearly meant to be like, oh, it's the future. We have like wild technology y'all have never seen because it's the year 2030 or whatever. It's so bad. If y'all have seen it, basically it's one of those shows that I watched all the way through and I was like, it, I am owed a series finale. I know it's a bad show, but I dedicated a lot of my time to it. I'm owed some wrap up. Mm-hmm. It was not a good choice.
I would like to point out that this is the second time you've mentioned the year 2030 or 2031. So whoever is in 2030 listening to this and is high is freaking out right now. Thinks you're trying to communicate to him or her.
If you're high right now, please get in touch with me.
If you're high,
I'm trying to give you a signal. You're right. It is a pattern. You're right. I'm speaking to you.
This person's gonna try to travel back in time.
Oh man. Oh, this is getting like trippy and meta.
It is. Yeah. It is. I didn't know it was gonna go this way.
Yeah, we've gone into some interesting stoner territory.
We really
have. I like it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you're probably thinking, wow, Bridget is the biggest buzzkill of all time. Not only is she shitting on the series finale of Weeds, but she doesn't even like 420. And here's why. So I have no problem with smoking weed, obviously, but let me hit y'all with some truth as the resident 420 buzzkill. According to the Drug Policy Alliance, women are now the fastest growing segment in the U.S. prison population, largely because of crappy drug laws. 2/3 of women doing time in federal prison right now are there because of nonviolent drug offenses. And so, I think drugs are cool. I mean, I'll say it. I think, like, as long as you, like, use it responsibly, like, but it's hard for me to see stats like that and kind of take part in the 420 hoopla, right? Like, it just doesn't feel right for me. Further, there are all these, I mean, I don't need to tell y'all, but there are all these heartbreaking stories. There was one that really sticks with me. This woman, Patricia Spotted Cow, she's an Indigenous mom of 4 who got a felony charge for a $31 marijuana sale during a sting operation. And it resulted in a 12-year prison sentence when she was only 25. And so, these stories, I'm sure that a lot of y'all hear them. If you're someone who pays attention to this issue at all, it's probably not surprising to hear that people who are marginalized are the ones who are locked up more, the ones who have their families destroyed more, deported more. There is this author, Ellen Komp. She wrote Token Women, A 4,000-Year History. She's also the current deputy director of California NORML. And one of the things that she writes about is how, for a long time, women and smoking was sort of a stigmatized thing. And I would argue it still is. And one of the reasons that women face stigma or maybe worry about using marijuana is because they worry about the government interfering with their parenting. And so if you get busted smoking weed, the concern is that you might have your kids taken away from you by Child Protective Services. And so, I obviously don't have a problem with drug use in and of itself. But it's like when I see things like, yoga moms do yoga between bong rips, it's so difficult for me to see that and be like, oh, that's cool, celebrate that, and not think about the disparities. Think about all the people whose lives have been ruined because they wanted to do the same thing that everybody else does, right? Like, we love smoking weed in America. We are a very weed-smoking country. Black people and white people use marijuana at the same rates, and yet the people who are locked up for it are people who look like me.
I do find that there's an interesting dynamic, or I don't know if that's the right word, with weed that is not there with alcohol, which you can, I like to use as a helpful comparison. They're different, but you can use it in kind of the same way, where with alcohol, there's not, I'm sober and completely wasted, and those are your only two options. You can be like lightly buzzed or tipsy or wasted, but I feel like with weed, it's, you're either sober or you're like stoned out of your mind. We don't really talk about those in between spaces. And yeah, when I was doing the research on edibles, I guess I'm kind of immature in the sense that I've always thought of like, your college pot brownie that you'd take two. Well, don't take two, but that's what I did. And you get stoned out of your mind, and that's your goal. Like that, there's no in between. And that comes from, I think, the stigmatization and the fact that it is legal. And there's this whole cycle of recreational marijuana was brought to the U.S. by Mexican immigrants. And it was around the time of the Great Depression. So who do Americans blame but the incoming immigrants? And so that's why they called it marijuana, was to, like, that scary sounding Mexican word.
That sounds exotic.
Yeah. And they capitalized on the fear of it. And because of that, it became almost a total black market thing. And we lost all of the how to use it, just basic knowledge of what it is and how to use it safely. And yeah, and when in the 60s, the swinging 60s, when white people discovered it and they were like, oh, I actually like this thing, then the laws eased back and they were like, okay, well, we'll let people do this more. And then the war on drugs with Ronald Reagan, and everything reversed and it became even worse than it was before then. And so I get what you're saying. It's a real shame. And we should you should think about these things. We should think about these things. You should be aware of what I'm a big proponent of that in like everything. You should know where your food comes from and the people that got it to you and how it got to you. And maybe why is it only 20 cents? These are questions you should ask. I just went on a tangent, kind of. Let's bring it back.
I don't think it is. It's not a tangent because I think that's true. I think the larger point, one that I am saving the last few cool points that I have. I think the larger point that you just made is where my anxiety around this comes from, is that we love closing our eyes to this, whether it's fast fashion, like why is this shirt $3?
Yeah.
Whether it's, why are avocados not grown in this state, but I have avocados here and they're very cheap.
Yeah.
Why is, we as a society, we like to not ask those questions because it's easier. And of course, like, who wants to ask those questions? You want your cheap shirt, you want your cheap you want, getting high is fun, right? Like, part of it is understandable because who wouldn't want to close their eyes to that? But I also think because of that very understandable kind of almost natural inclination, we then don't even ask, who is being arrested for this and why, and what do they look like? Or what is the environmental impact of this, right? Like, when I was living in New York, all of my super lefty woke friends all were big cocaine users and also very big environmentalists. And if you know anything about cocaine production, that's a tough square to circle.
Right.
And we, what we do? We don't circle that square. We just keep doing cocaine and we move on. We don't deal with it. And I think with marijuana, because it is so glorified in pop culture, it's one of those things that I can't not see it. I feel like I see it everywhere. Like when I see those pot mom stories, oh, yoga pot mom, it just feels so isolating because I know people who personally had their children taken away were the exact same thing. And so it's like for me, because marijuana comes along with this sort of fun, freewheeling, cool pop culture thing, which I also really hate. It's like I can't do the thing that feels good, which is not ask those questions. It's like those questions are in my face.
Right. Yeah, and it's another unfortunate thing that I myself am guilty of, that I kind of always chuckle and make marijuana jokes. I'm really bad about it. I love puns anyway, but marijuana has so many associated with it. So I make them, and it's part of the immaturity around the whole thing that's in part because of pop culture and in part because it is so stigmatized and we don't talk about it. And there is that image of, you kind of mentioned earlier, women are afraid to be seen of the stoner, because in our head, that's a dropout, or somebody who is on the fast track to prison.
Or someone who has had their kids taken away.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah. We can't even have a serious conversation about it. And luckily, we are sort of moving that way, but slow goings.
Yeah. And I don't want to, I'm sounding like such a buzzkill, but so I'm going to say, Noah should be making, marijuana's not funny. Don't watch Super Troopers. That's awful. No, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying, I don't know. I just think that because of what you just mentioned, stigma, I don't think anybody should have their kids taken away because they smoke pot. And I think that obviously some people have to worry about that more than others. But I think writ large, our inability to talk about marijuana in a way that's, I guess, like what you said, adult, while also realizing it's fun, it's ripe for humor. Certainly, I'm as guilty of it as anybody. But I think that it's like this. It's like either one or the other. Either you get to live in a world where marijuana is this funny, fun, freewheeling thing, or you get to live in a world where people have their kids taken away and you get deported. And it's like, I want us all to live in the same world where, which is we're dealing with it in a realistic way, not have part of our citizenry live in one world and part of us live in another. But I guess that's not true because there's How High, which is also a funny movie, and they're Black. So I don't know. I don't know what I'm saying.
Well, this is your unpopular opinion. You get to just have it, and that's the beauty.
Yeah. Thank you, Annie. This is good. I people who know me know that this is a weird hang-up of mine. Even as someone who is fine with marijuana use and drug use, but this is a weird hang-up of mine. And every 420, I'm like, oh, Vice is going to do Weed Week, and I'm going to watch every episode. I gotta stop watching Vice. Really
I want you to live tweet it. Please. Getting angrier and angrier.
I
know. Over on Food Stuff, we got to talk to Becca Graham from Dope Girls, which is a local zine that gets published, and it's all about the intersection of feminism and marginalized people and cannabis culture. And if you're interested in any of this, I would go check it out because she had such good things to say, and she was just much more well-spoken on it than I am, because I am kind of on the fringe of
being high.
Well, generally. No. I guess I've always I'm still in that college mindset, unfortunately, of it happens to be at this party or whatever. So I'm not very well informed about the goings on, but she was very well spoken. And if you're in Atlanta, totally look them up. If you're not in Atlanta, look them up. But in Atlanta, they do events and fundraisers and stuff.
Well, checking out their stuff, one of the things I love that they're doing, and I think this is really rad, is they're working to kind of bridge that intersection I was talking about earlier. So my anxiety about how we celebrate marijuana comes from what I feel like is a disparity clearly they are people who are, intersectional and, multicultural, and working to bridge that gap that leaves a lot of people feeling a little bit alienated about weed culture, because weed can